Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if Naruto and Hinata were silent prodigies part 5. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Now let begin. The sun rose into the sky to announce another day in the ninja village, much to Hinata's dismay. She had pulled yet another all-nighter the previous evening, straining herself in her search for information on the strange suit-clad man who detected her camera. How can there be nothing on this guy? She wondered as she took an out-of-the-way route to rendezvous with her novice squad. Seriously, there's a vacuum of data on him. No one except Anzo even knew the guy was there, and he sure as hell didn't look like a shinobi. What does that mean? Lost in her thoughts, she forgot that she wasn't in the catacombs beneath her feet, and walked with her arms folded behind her head, while her hands cradled the back of her skull. She let loose a yawn produced from 48 hours of hard-working sleeplessness, not worried that anyone saw her. The alley she was strolling down was deserted anyway, or at least as far as her weary mind could tell. Kurenai hid in the shadows watching her student, relying on her full arsenal of stealth techniques to ensure that her blue-haired pupil wouldn't detect her. She only hoped that the girl didn't activate her bloodline and render all her efforts in vain. As she spied on her student, she was shocked to find her behaving uncouthly. What's this? Hinata Hyuga stretching and yawning in broad daylight? When did she pick this up? As she continued to tail the girl, she witnessed the prim and proper heiress perform unfamiliar acts such as lazily glancing around with glazed-over lavender eyes, scratching herself wherever she felt an itch, and even picking her nose once before flinging the findings away. They're all small things, but she's never done any of this before. What happened to her? The Yui followed the undercover genius for a while longer, until she ran out of alleyways in which to reside. Deciding to take one last look at her charge before rushing off to the meeting point, she felt the impulse for her jaw to drop and resisted when the Hyuga emerged from the final alley into a populated street and became shy and withdrawn again. All right, something's up. This isn't right. Hinata's acting un-Hinata-like when no one's around. Now how should I look into this? She blinked a few times and realized that moment was not an appropriate time for such musings. I figure it out later. If I'm late, she'll suspect something. She broke her overlapping techniques and took a swift route to the rendezvous location. As Gen and Team 7 made their way back to Konoha, Naruto was busy plotting his next course of action as Curse. I should look into medical techniques, he pondered, having ordered a trio of clones to dig up Haku's body, drain all the remaining blood into a sterile container, and rebury the corpse the evening the ice user was housed in his final resting place. Course, that stuff's not my strong point. As much as I hate to admit it, I'll bet Silence could pull a secret or two out of that bloodline. As things stand right now, he accidentally cracked a humble grin at the thought of his intelligent rival, but caught himself in time to make his mouth explode into a smile, and enthusiastically asked Sakura out on a date, which she thankfully refused. In accordance with his well-known mask, he whined about her choice when Sasuke muttered his 2 cents and got the blonde engaged in another mental rant against the Uchiha. That arrogant son of a bitch, he thought, barely checking the urge to knock the so-called genius flat on his ass. Ever since he activated his Sharingan, he's been more of an asshole than ever. He would have planned on acting on his dislike for the boy, except doing so could potentially jeopardize his cover. He had never seen the withdrawn preteen in a truly private place during the late evening hours, the only times the Uzumaki would even think to consider venturing outdoors. Ah well, let him have his fun for a while. Of course, the day was only beginning when he stepped foot inside his crappy apartment. He immediately battened down the hatches, checking all his traps and alarms to be sure they held up during his absence, and making sure not a soul was watching before he descended the hidden vertical passage. He entered his secret chamber and was pleased to find it as he left it. He strolled over to the small metal dump built into the farthest corner of the spacey room and gathered up a few panels of tin and iron. Casting a small fire-based technique, he heated the metal sheet's edges and promptly made a box with a simple hinged lid. As he unsealed the container with Haku's blood from one of the seals in his back, he performed a basic ice move to significantly cool down the new makeshift refrigerator before placing the plasma samples inside and locking it shut. I've got to prepare some seals to keep this thing cold. Well, that or build a generator. He pondered the minor quandary for a moment and decided the generator would be more suitable for the task. He returned to the miniature scrap yard and began picking through the random pieces of metal when a steel door caught the corner of his eye. His head turned to gaze at the secure passage, and he remembered what it was for. Oh yeah, I've got a prisoner now. I wonder if she's still alive. The blonde genius strode up to the heavy door while donning his mask and unlocked the numerous bolts before swinging the hunk of steel inward. You alive in there? He called with a casual underlying tone. Ah. A pair of brown eyes shot over to him with a deer in the headlights look. See, Curse, you're back? I'll take that as a yes. He strolled up to the gates and glared down at her as she sat cross-legged on the rough stone floor. "Looks like you went through all those rations." She said nothing, peering down as if ashamed. Her behavior really reminded him of the chronically shy Hyuga Hinata. "I thought up some more questions while I was away." Now, Gers said nothing as he pulled the shackles off her feet and tossed them outside the prison against the uneven rock wall. "Reward," he stated simply as he rose and glanced down to meet her gaze. "If your commander's nice to you, then I might have a use for you yet." He backed off a few feet, then turned on his heel to make for the heavy steel door. "I'll feed you later," he informed her as he proceeded to shut the heavy entrance and lock it up. Before the door closed, the imprisoned girl collected herself as best she could and yelled, "Thank you." Naruto reinstated the final lock and turned back to stare at his metal dump. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered before continuing his current project of building a small generator. Hinata leaned back in her chair and let a profound yawn loose from her soft lips. She had been at this new endeavor for a week straight, and only now was it beginning to show any results. She decided after her brief encounter with the stranger in the blue suit that she needed some new weaponry in her arsenal. She had determined that her next armaments would need to be highly explosive yet numerous, seeing as how she had a Jashin follower running loose in the underground hive in which she resided. Her first choice was to construct small fragile marbles that contained a highly unstable chemical substance that would explode if jarred, but that turned out to be too unpredictable for her tastes. She then tried injecting the volatile liquid into hollowed-out needles, but the explosive yield was too pitiful for combat. Her final solution was to strip away an outermost casing from the needles, wrap exploding tags around them, then replace the sheared metal back over the slips of lethal paper for a shrapnel effect. She tested the first few prototypes with large degrees of success, but the actual process of merging the shinobi tools was insanely time-consuming. After constructing a laughably small amount of the explosive slivers by hand in a few days' time, she built a simple machine that could do it automatically. However, she had to reduce the device's speed in order to exponentially reduce the number of errors it made. While her machinations were doing better than her, it wasn't by much, so she built a dozen of the accursed machines to accomplish the job. Now that production of the supercharged projectiles was in full swing, she could concentrate on their delivery system. She had a handful of ideas ranging from upgrading her current equipment to creating new devices from the get-go. She took a seat at her desk and began working out a few schematics when she glanced over to find her concentrated energy weapon laying peacefully in its holster, ready for combat. "I don't know if that damn thing's brilliant or a piece of crap," she wondered. "No matter how many times I improve it, the insides still melt after 2 or 3 shots. It's so unreliable. And the power consumption? I'll bet if I hooked that thing up to the Konoha power grid I could cause a blackout." She chuckled at the last thought and filed it under the for a rainy day experiments. She continued working vigorously until she came up with 2 plans involving her new needles that she found the most feasible. Quickly scribbling down the math involved, she stood and made her way to her main workstation and began assembling the required parts. "This is gonna be great," she quietly exclaimed to herself with an unavoidable sense of victory rising in her stomach. "Fumetsu," a patrolman yelled as the undying man entered the chamber that reeked of cigarettes and booze. "Help us out." Here the Jashin follower appeared as a hefty number of his co-workers struggled to restrain Takemi. The hapless men were fighting a losing battle. "Lem go," the fiery woman shouted at the top of her lungs. Her breath stank of alcohol and her voice was slurring pretty badly. "Damn faggots, you can't take me on." "Well, I'll be," the immortal mused with total apathy ruling his features. "She's actually drunk." Wait, he paused and thought before voicing a valid question. "How did she become intoxicated? Isn't it obvious?" Another guard shouted, "She drank too much." "I'm a-going back home to see my daughter. Let go of me." The tough woman yelled as she elbowed a subordinate in the face and broke his nose. "How much did she drink?" Fumetsu continued, undaunted by his inebriated commander's random threats and swearing. She whined as she began to fall asleep. "Just wanna see my little girl. Damn fuckers, lem go assholes." Her voice trailed off as her altered mindset settled into slumber. Third Hokage was concerned to say the least. He was perched on the roof of the central tower in Konoha overseeing the village in the early moonlight. Earlier in the day, Kakashi gave his report on Team 7's latest mission, and the old man was mildly disturbed to hear about the fox's chakra leaking out at one point. A presence appearing behind him caught his attention, and he turned to address the Anbu member kneeling before him. "You summoned me, Lord Hokage?" the prone ninja said. "Tenzu," Saratobi began, "I'm sure you are aware of a certain demon that resides in a living container." "Yes, sir." "Good. You are to work with Kakashi Hatake in secret concerning Naruto Uzumaki." "Captain Kakashi?" Yes, this mission is of utmost priority, so you are to speak of it only with mere Kakashi. Understand, yes, sir. The aging shinobi nodded in approval. This particular masked man had special talents when it came to chakra suppression. Contact Kakashi for all the information you need. I already informed him of your assistance. Dismissed. With that, the Anbu man shimmered out of view, and Saratobi let out a weary sigh. Naruto, he muttered, I hope that seal's holding out. For all our sakes, it was a red-letter day for Danzo. He was irritated, and that feeling did not occur often in his limited repertoire of emotions. It only reared its head when huge impediments to his goals came along, and now he was faced with such a situation. Several weeks ago, he issued orders for his loyal root ninjas to search and destroy what had been designated as the strongmen that dwelled within the catacombs underneath the village. Since then, one by one, his followers were either disappearing or dying, and he hadn't the faintest idea who was responsible. It's a strange scenario. He mulled over the predicament. The ones that vanished do so without a trace. It's like they never existed at all. He snorted at the irony of the conclusion. His shinobi didn't exist to begin with, and they were truly becoming whispers in the wind. But the ones that turn up dead are horribly mutilated, and their wounds were inflicted by weapons that aren't in Konoha's records. His thoughts were interrupted when he was approached by Kaharu and Hamura. The aging duo appeared equally anxious. Any news? Kaharu inquired. None as of yet. These strongmen are elusive. We have utilized our own Anbu forces to search for them, Hamura informed. Hopefully our combined forces will drive them out of hiding. The Warhawk eyed the elder man. With all due respect, my forces are far more numerous than the troops that are loyal to the village, rather than the Hokage. We understand that, but how successful has your superior army been thus far? Danzo glared his retort. He wouldn't admit it, but the old man had a point. After a moment of silence, he changed the subject. What if our forces make contact? Root was supposedly disbanded years ago. That won't be a problem, the aging woman consoled. We've taken great pains to ensure that their search areas are different. But more importantly, what about those you have lost? Why are they dying if they don't disappear altogether? They are terminated. The injuries inflicted on the retrieved corpses have been made by unconventional weaponry, of which no registered shinobi of Konoha uses. The disappearances are simply that, they vanish without any evidence left behind. The old man nodded his head. Troubling, he muttered. I took the liberty of analyzing the scarring on some of your deceased subordinates, the elderly woman stated. I cross-checked them with the wounds from the first victims of the strongmen and they are noticeably different. The Warhawk's eye furrowed. How so? The wounds on the first corpses are swift, clean cuts and scarring indicative of traditional explosives or electrical burns. The more recent injuries are extremely jagged for the most part, and the causes of death are widely varied. I think it's safe to assume we're dealing with at least two groups of strongmen. There are the disappearances to consider as well, Hamura added as his sharp mind kicked into gear. Assuming that the killings are the sole method of operations, we may be dealing with a third strongman organization that prefers abduction. As the aging ninjas discuss their meager findings, an Ira listened in from a dark shadow in the corner. They're not legends for nothing, I guess the hooded individual within the darkness concluded apathetically. No matter. They are but pawns in this game. The next evening, Curse was entertaining himself by weaving through the hive below his hometown. That night, he had found a succession of narrower passages that led progressively towards the surface and took the opportunity to see where they came out. After an hour of careful scurrying, he eventually came upon a long hallway that curved out of view with ladders leading to grates dotting the incredibly lengthy tunnel. Curious, he strode over to the nearest covering and, with a significant push, forced the steel hatch open. He poked his masked head out to find that the entrance was buried a few feet under soft soil and surrounded by tall brush and long thick flowing grass flowing amidst a forest. This looks familiar, he mused as he scanned the environment. Deciding to take a risk, he exited the hole and ventured out into the woods. After a minute, the pattern of trees clicked in his mind. Oh, these are the training grounds. That's cool, a quick escape, if I ever needed. Another minute passed as he trekked through the dense undergrowth, rapidly growing bored with the unveiled secret. He harbored thoughts of returning to the hidden tunnel when he heard the distinct sound of metal striking wood. Curiosity got the better of him, and he silently made his way to the noise. After a few moments, he came across the source and his lips split into a grin. Well, look who's here, he thought as his mirror gaze found Sasuke Uchiha practicing advanced kunai techniques, out in the open, alone. Naruto wondered if he should act on the sudden impulse to beat the so-called genius into a carpet stain when he unconsciously shifted his weight and his foot snapped a strained fallen branch. Who's there? The moody boy demanded as he spun on his heel and instinctively launched the knives in his hands at the source of the sudden noise. I know you're there. Show yourself. Curse's mostly hidden features contorted into a wild smile, and he stepped out from his poor cover, the metal loops of the kunai wrapped around his fingers. Well, look who we have here, Sasuke-cha. How do you know my name? The preteen demanded, staying cool and collected as he drew more bladed weapons to threaten the stranger. Who are you? Call me Curse. You know, I'm quite a big fan of yours. When the blonde saw the dark-haired boy's eyebrow raise in a questioning gesture, he chuckled and continued, oh yes, it's true. The last survivor of the infamous Uchiha massacre. Word has it that your Sharingan's been activated too. I look forward to seeing your future performances. Is there a reason you're here? Sasuke's cord never faltered. Well, yes and no. He began tapping his wooden metal sandal against the ground casually as he assumed a relaxed. Said blonde liked where the conversation was going and decided to bait the genius into a fight. Naruto? Oh, that's right. Naruto Uzumaki, one of your teammates. Now he's got talent waiting to come out. Chi. That loser? Are you kidding? He's hopeless. He'll only get in my way. I think you misunderstood me, Uchiha, he emphasized to get his insult across. I was implying that he has more innate talent than you. I thought you'd get the idea from my choice of words. What? He was starting to become irate. You heard me. I've seen your past performances. You're arrogant, self-centered, and clueless. You don't understand the underlying concepts of teamwork, and you're a showboater. You think everyone else is below you, just because you're in a Uchiha. What do you know? His voice was turning dark and his knuckles turned white from his tight grip. What the hell do you know? I know that in terms of a shinobi, you're worthless. All you got is a Sharingan, and you can't even use it the right way. Shut up. He tossed a handful of kunai at the masked genius and moved his hands through the necessary seals for a fire technique. As the stranger easily dodged the knives, he reeled back to collect the chakra in his chest and lurched forward, spitting an enormous ball of flames out. He smirked when he saw the mobile conflagration engulf the insulting man, and he turned to leave. Where are you going? Sasuke shot around and peered at the opponent who should have been burned to a crisp, only to find him casually strolling towards him inside a diminishing swirling pillar of water. The Uchiha cursed under his breath and activated his bloodline. There we go. Curse exclaimed when the boy's pupils changed colors and drew his preferred ninjato from its seal. Now lem see what you can do with those eyes. The moody preteen shot forward in a zigzag pattern, throwing out kunai and shuriken towards the enemy as he went. His superior side easily saw the masked man's sword swivel and turned to easily bat away the weapons, and he pulled out a special pair of throwing stars with attached wires. He then leapt back from his random charge and threw the projectiles with purpose. Using his Sharingan, he manipulated the shuriken through the wires and wrapped the undercover genius to a nearby post. He collected the metal strands in one hand and prepared to breath fire down the line when his body suddenly jolted back. Naruto had calmly grasped the binding cords with 2 fingers and sent a surge of lightning chakra down them. He wasn't especially attuned to that element, but his dealings with Silence's near-constant electrical attacks forced him to become proficient with it. Come on, he taunted as the lines went slack, and he casually freed himself by walking forward. Where's that great Uchiha talent everyone talks about? Shut up. Sasuke vowed as he blew another intense fireball at the approaching man. This time, however, he followed up the attack by unsheathing a pair of demon wind shuriken and lobbing them into the retreating flames. To his dismay, everything passed through unhindered, leaving behind a pile of smoking dirt as the large throwing stars embedded themselves into a distant tree. Not even close, a voice stated in his ear, causing him to reel around, throwing out a backhand and a kick simultaneously behind him, only to have the limbs caught and a cold feeling wrap around them before encasing the remainder of his body. His movement was restricted by what he realized was an extensive chain attached to a sickle, and he fell to the ground, unable to summon the chakra to substitute his body with something else. How did you do that? He shouted at the mirror-eyed crimson mask staring down at him. I was watching you the whole time. You had no opportunities. Shut up and listen, Curse said solemnly as he pressed his straight weapon's blade to the Uchiha's neck while holding the curved short sword in his other hand. You want to know how I beat you? Remember when I was tapping my foot during our little conversation? He took Sasuke's angry glare for yes. I was forming earth clones with my chakra that way. When your second fireball hit me, I switched my body with the closest one and hit you from behind. He squatted to bring his face closer to the preteen, sputtering with rage, and continued as calmly as he could muster. I fought a 9-year-old with severe psychological problems not too long ago, and had more problems then than with you. I haven't even broken a sweat in this little practice run. How dare you? Naruto leaned in until his mask was 2 inches away from the defeated opponent's face. Shut up, weakling. You're a damn fool if you think that Sharingan will solve all your problems. I don't even have any special bloodline and I moved, 20 feet? Until your arrogance subsides, you will always be a weak little boy. Remember this. Sasuke grit his teeth so hard he threatened to crack them into pieces. As pissed as he was, this stranger that had beaten him so easily had rule of the floor. He merely stared daggers into the genius until the guy stood up. Oh, and one more thing, the winner addressed him. If you tell anyone of this little midnight sparring or about our little talk, I will kill you without hesitation. Load of crap, he muttered to the side. Don't be so quick to judge. I didn't even have time to sweat during the match. Remember that. With that, Curse disappeared in a puff of smoke, chain and all. At that moment, the Uchiha got to his feet and made his way home. He tried to blow off everything his opponent said, but the enemy's words echoed in his mind. Weakling. As Naruto backtracked through the extensive hive to return home, he felt a massive load of stress melting away. Oh yeah, he cheered mentally, I kick his ass. That'll teach him. He was on cloud 9, so much so that as he re-entered the large vertical hub, he didn't immediately notice the other presence in the huge chamber. He suddenly became aware of someone else when he saw movement approaching him from the corner of his hidden azure eyes. Whoa, shit, he yelped in surprise as he slid into a low stance and released his favorite sword. Hang on, a pair of upturned palms was the first thing he saw as Silence spoke. I'm not here to fight this time. Sure you're not. Curse replied sarcastically, eyeing his rival and noting the changes in her uniform. There was a rectangular slit crossing her blue mask's mouthpiece, and the explosive stake launchers on her right arm looked different. She also wore some kind of wavy spring-operated blade in a gauntlet on her left arm, and she was missing that energy weapon that damn near burned a hole through him. What do you want? We've got visitors down here. Tell me something I don't know. I've already been attacked. He conveniently left out that there were 2 parties involved, and that he took a 9-year-old girl prisoner. Same here, but there were 2 separate groups. The blonde's eyes furrowed behind his crimson mask. Her 2? This could be. He eased his guard and continued the conversation. You got any news on them? Her covered head shook with a slight shrug. A 3-man team of masked guys that look like Anbu and a lone fighter. Anbu? How do you know that? I don't think they are. I think they're part of Root. I see Root's supposedly not around anymore. Yep. Where better to hide than down here? She held her arms out to gesture at the cavernous room around them. You said a lone fighter came after them? Yeah, a Jashin follower. This caught Naruto off guard. He was surprised that his arch-nemesis knew the identity of her secondary enemy, as well as the fact that she was sharing information so freely with him. Jashin, eh? You sure know a lot. He had friends, too. I had to. But Hinata was getting frustrated at the interrogation. She was trying to build a temporary alliance between them by sharing what she knew freely, and Curse was making it as difficult as he could. The head of the Root organization is an old fart by the name of Danzo. He's an ancient warmonger who believes in protecting the village at any cost. If the Jashin guy was on another side, then there could be an enemy presence around here. The red mane fitted over the blonde's head fluttered in the air as he nodded in agreement. I think you're right. I was also attacked by a 3-man Root cell and a single ninja operating independently. I managed to capture the new enemy, and I'm still in the process of interrogation. Really? The Hyuga replied with mild surprise in her voice. What have you figured out so far? Apparently their commander's name is Takemi, and she's taking orders from a higher power. He sighed. My prisoner's just a foot soldier, and doesn't really know anything more than that. Silence's head cocked to the side. How about where their base is? No good either. They didn't pay attention to their surroundings. What? Your prisoner doesn't have a place to report back? Curse stood in silence as he processed what the female prodigy meant. Oh my god, he smacked his visage with his free hand. I can't believe I didn't think of that. The girl laughed at her rival's foul up. Wow, you aren't very good at interrogation, are you? Shut up, he commanded, only earning more laughter from her. She sighed as her jovialness subsided. That's great. Anyway, she took on a good-natured friendly tone. I propose that we join forces until we eliminate this threat. She held out a hand covered in electric film. Naruto stared at the extended limb, as if it were a giant worm. Hell, why not, he concluded as he put a minuscule amount of faith in his intelligent nemesis, and pressed his hand into hers to complete the agreement. But only until this shit blows over, agreed the blue-haired preteen smile behind her mask. Wouldn't expect anything less. She broke the handshake and her head swiveled around when her activated Byakugan noticed something. Well, ain't that sweet? A condescending voice echoed from above. Looks like I hit the jackpot shit, both geniuses swore in unison as they glanced upwards to find a man sitting atop the bridge over their heads. The enemy leapt down and landed smoothly a dozen meters away from them. The ninja had dull slick crimson hair and eyes to match. His uniform consisted of a bulky light gray jacket with matching pants that were held on by an embroidered rope sloppily tied off to the side. As he turned towards his foes, the light bouncing off the wall shone off the smoke. Upon hearing the introductions, Naruto launched forward while drawing his ninjato and clashing with the enemy's jagged gauntlet blades. Giza thrust back with both arms to throw the Uzumaki off balance for a split second, then rushed in for the kill. However, instead of embedding the extended rough sickles into flesh, he collided with a crackling blur of circular motion while Curse recovered. Hinata released yin and yang and launched it into a curving motion that arsed around her temporary ally and greeted the opponent. Having been repurposed again as a weapon, the massive top of death caught the ragged blades with its own curved knives and expended a large jolt of electricity into the rough metal. Giza stood paralyzed for a moment, shaking slightly as the external power surged through his body, when the blonde genius stepped forward and jammed his sword into the man's gut. The glyphs on the Prodigies' blade shine with intense ferocity, as their nature was reversed so the weapon, rather than merge with the basic elements, rejected the electricity, keeping their owner from harm. As the blue-haired girl's weapon fell to the ground and she recalled it wirelessly, Curse glanced at the impaled enemy's eyes and was shocked and disgusted all at once. What the hell? He muttered as he gazed at the man's face. The opponent's eyes were fluttering into the top of their sockets in ecstasy, and his lips were curled into a smile of joyous satisfaction. Naruto was forced to pull away when the man's limbs suddenly came to life and swung for his head. Shit. The Hyuga swore, another freak? She raised her right arm and her spike launchers hissed with smoke as they forcefully ejected their ammunition. Too late, girly. Giza taunted as he leapt over the edge of the suspended bridge, scratching the stone surface as he traveled. His gauntlet's blades took hold in the rock and kept him suspended as his weight succumbed to gravity. Already heard about you from Fumetsu the Jashin guy? She replied as her expended bolt stuck into a narrow pillar some ways away. A new set loaded and she took aim. You know him, hell yeah? He shouted back as he planted his feet on the underside of the suspended stone, locked them to the rock with chakra, and then pulled his weapons free. I work with him. He somehow flipped himself back on top of the landing, temporarily ignoring the laws of physics. As he did so, his recovery was instantly met with a crimson mask and matching mane charging for him. Giza caught Curse's straight sword as it came down for his head and bent forward, aiming his other bladed arm to swipe across the blonde's abdomen. He grinned widely in anticipation for blood when his moving limb suddenly stopped. He eyed the disobedient appendage and found it being held back by a pristine, spiraling staff of metal. Following the steel pole, he glanced up to find a clone of Curse ready to crash down onto his head. The man smirked as he slid his arm up to block the boy's sword and slashed the incoming genius copy with the tip of the extended jagged scythe. The clone instantly melted into mud and smothered him, hindering his movement as it stuck to the ground like glue. Naruto stepped back in time to avoid his earth clone's transition to a sticky substance and felt silence move, and when he halted, the girl threw her left arm out in a sideswipe, and the mechanical gauntlet strapped to the limb shot out an exotic wave-like blade that contained needles held in place by tiny grooves. The weapon jammed into the hardening super dirt and, with a flick of Hinata's wrist, retracted into its casing. The female genius leapt back immediately afterwards and was closely followed by her counterpart, who noticed that the needles from the new toy were now stuck into their opponent. A moment later, the tiny slivers exploded in a spectacular fireball. That was stupid. The Uzumaki berated his temporary rival. That technique had him secured. Shut up. She shouted back. That killed him. Think again. The hostile stranger announced as he burst from the smoke and slashed for the blue-haired girl's face, catching the secured mechanized weapon that had freed him as it moved to parry the blow. Thanks for the blast. That stuff was hard? The blonde tapped his foot against the ground, and two more earth clones rose up from the stone behind the enemy. As soon as they were properly formed, they unsealed the chain gauntlets the boy had copied from the Demon Brothers and charged for the opponent. When he became aware of their presence and turned his head with a mad smile to find them, one copy leapt into the air and twirled in the air before touching down on the suspended bridge. The clone's actions were successful in trapping Giza, who was now bound by a coiling bladed chain. The two geniuses leapt back as the earth clones yanked back on their gauntlets to slice the man apart. However, their arms only moved a sum total of 3 inches before stopping. The surprised copies glanced back to find their captive chuckling to himself while trembling in ecstasy. Before they could finish the job, the chain wrapped around the man corroded and fell to pieces. Stumbling, the cursed copies unsealed their dual broadswords and charged the man, only to melt into mud when he flung his arms at them and spattered blood on their faces. What the hell did he do? I don't know, she answered in a hushed tone. Some kind of weird technique. Come on, come on, Giza called as he ran his jagged blade's edges across his injuries and covered them with his blood. As the plasma oozed onto the weapons and started smoking, his clothing around the open wounds began to drip as they melted away. There's enough pain to go around for everyone. He's insane, the blonde stated mutely to his temporary partner. She nodded in agreement and nudged herself closer to her rival's ear. I think I've got an idea. As she whispered into his ear, the crazed man took the opportunity to rush forward with his arms akimbo, gooey blood spraying to the sides as they caught the air in his swift movement. Sounds good, Naruto affirmed the instant before leaping off to one side, while Silence dodged the opposite direction. The blonde put his fingers into a familiar seal, and half a dozen shadow clones puffed into existence. Can't use this like I usually do, he thought. She'll know exactly who I am if I do. The copies unsealed various weapons and charged the bleeding enemy, who confronted them by swinging his arms wildly and tossing droplets of blood on them. 5 of the clones were sprayed by the crimson liquid, and their ensuing death created a miniature smokescreen. The remaining copy burst through the smoke and jabbed a steel spear into the man. The original curse smirked when he barely saw the action through the scattering dust, and frowned when he felt the final clone's memories flood into his skull. He moved his hands to the seals on his upper arms to initiate a barrage of throwing weapons when the smoke cleared and he found Giza still standing where he was impaled, eyes fluttering into the back of his head and lips curling into a perverse smile as he slowly pulled the edged staff from his abdomen. Before the blade of the spear could clear the flesh, however, Hinata moved behind the man and aimed her stake launchers point blank. Hinata moved behind the man and aimed her stake launchers point blank at his kidneys, a lethal blow. Exhaust erupted from the magnetized tubes, and the explosive rods flew forward and missed. The mad ninja twisted out of the way in time to receive no more than a graze in his deteriorating clothing, and use his momentum to swing his left arm back and catch the Hyuga's mechanized blade as it came up in defense. A few drops of blood transferred from the jagged blades to the blue-haired genius's gauntlet, and the girl immediately felt her arm heat up ever so slightly. Naruto jumped in from the opposite direction and jammed a pair of short swords through the bloody shinobi's ribs, thoroughly piercing the lungs. The enemy faltered when the pain coursed through his body, and the blonde leapt back with blades in hand when his ally did the same. He carefully circled the sputtering opponent with his eyes locked on the dying man and rejoined Silence. Well, he commented, looks like we didn't need to go that far. Shut up, she berated him, it was a good plan. We just improvised well. Fine, fine, he was about to reseal his slim blades when he realized they suddenly felt much lighter. Glancing at them, he instinctively dropped them, and the handles clattered against the ground. What the hell, what? Silence fell back in concern, hearing the surprise in Curse's voice. She peered at the swords and immediately understood why. Dual short swords blades were covered in the enemy's thick blood and severely deteriorated to the point that they appeared as rusty rotted wood and had fallen away at the hilt. Realization struck the prodigy girl's mind, and she moved her blade's gauntlet to her mask and found the tiny droplets of blood from the transfer bubbling into the hard steel, smoking as it dissolved into the thick metal and leaving behind decent-sized divots. His blood's acid, she proclaimed. Oh, the Uzumaki responded simply. That explains a lot. Indeed it did. Everything from the clones dying without effort to why Giza's weapons were so jagged became crystal clear. A cough emanating from Giza brought them back to reality as their gazes shot towards the crazed man. The enemy stood to his feet, coughed a trickle of blood, and smiled maniacally. Well done. Excellent. The pain was superb. Let's do it again. That should have killed you. Naruto shouted, why aren't you dead? Simple. His smile never dropped. It's a little trick that exists in my blood. No one else can do it, and because it melts everything, no one can analyze it. Ain't it grand? Who are you, exactly? Silence questioned. The guy seemed to be rather talkative at the moment, so maybe he would drop some information. I already told you. He tapped his toes against the slippery stone floor as his hand reached for a tiny vial hidden in his coiled belt. I'm Giza. He upturned the glass tube and threw it to the side. Who do you work for? She continued, wondering about what he just drank. His smirk was ever present. Who do I work for? He repeated to himself, you know, that's a relative question. I guess in the end I work for that bastard. Who's that? Curse inquired, picking up on his ally's play. But I hate that asshole's guts. He ignored the blonde. He held up his right hand and parted his thumb and index finger by an inch. I actually got this close to killing the fucker once, too. Then I got transferred here. You tried to kill who? Takemi? The boy's question earned a curious glance from the genius girl. Commander Takemi? He looked genuinely surprised, then chuckled. Not even, but she tried to kill him too. Hell, I think all of us did. All of us? The Hyuga resumed the impromptu interrogation. What? That Shia brat didn't tell you? Hinata glared at her temporary ally, frustrated that he held back information when she divulged her own. Her stare went unnoticed. Guess not. She's pretty useless anyway, so why don't I tell you? He held his bloody arms akimbo in a grand gesture. Every one of us in the advance recon is a criminal from our village. Each and every person I work with has killed our weaker comrades to become stronger, even Takemi. Hell, the only reason our so-called leader got rid of us was because he feared us. If we combined our strengths, we could easily kill him, so he made sure we couldn't. A moment of silence whisked by before the female prodigy spoke up again. Why do you want to kill your leader? Simple? He curled his hands into fists and held them against his face to hide his maniacal grin. I joined for revenge. That bastard started killing my entire family for our blood secret, and I offered my services in place for their lives, but he killed the rest anyway. And when he comes here himself, he lowered his arms to reveal his upper teeth, biting his lower lip and drawing blood in ecstatic excitement. We'll all have our chance again. Who is you, leader? Maybe we can help. An insane laugh drowned out her question. This is our vengeance, not yours. We're murderers and killers, and it's nothing short of a miracle that we aren't butchering each other. Answer the question, Naruto commanded calmly. Who is your leader? The madman's smile returned. It'd be too easy to tell you for free. You gotta pay a toll for that one. With that, he charged hellbound for the Prodigies. Screw it. The Hyuga shouted as she moved to put distance between them. Curse, take his head off. Got it. As the boy stepped back, he threw his left arm forward and pumped chakra into the appendage's rings. The glyphs in the smooth metal shined, and a slew of bladed yo-yos flew from the finger adornments toward Giza. The spinning buzzsaws dug into the bleeding man's flesh, and the madman laughed hard as they tore apart tissue and muscle. Almost, he announced as his acidic blood began to corrode the lethal toys, and they fell apart. Here's another little trick, the opponent announced as he grasped the wires connected to the disintegrating playthings, and a sudden trail of blood began spiraling along the metal line with a life of its own. The hell? The blonde cursed as he cut off the connection before the liquid plasma could reach him. Here he sealed his sword, replaced it with a demon windmill shuriken covered in explosive tags, and lobbed the massive throwing star at the man. The crazed man's blood pooled from one of his numerous wounds to his jagged blades, and suddenly burst out in an imitation of said ragged instruments. The blood weapons easily extended 6 feet from their rough bases, and swung solidly in the air as their owner slammed one knee to the ground, and used his left extension to meld the shuriken before it could reach him. The surviving slabs of metal from the airborne weapon flew out in every direction, and one of the chunks embedded into Giza's shoulder. This only elicited a chuckle and shiver of satisfaction as the insane ninja reveled in the extraordinary endorphin release. Hinata took the prone shinobi's paws to retaliate with yin and yang. The electrified weapon spun wildly toward the opponent and, remotely operated by the genius girl, flew through the air due to the pins on the bottom surface and spun into the man's side. The Hyuga decided to swallow the loss and activate the self-destruct sequence of her prize machine, but the enemy grasped one of the numerous curved blades and yanked the device out of his flesh. A sudden cavalcade of blood spiraled from the wound and saturated the metal surface before he reeled back and forcefully returned it with a mighty toss. Yin and Yang carried a spin from the throw and elected dissolving blood everywhere along its trajectory. The female prodigy attempted to control her machine's actions, but the acidic fluid had fully corroded the sensitive internal electronics, leaving behind nothing but an airborne husk of melting metal. In a last-ditch effort, she disarmed the explosive function of her sharpened rods and fired the stakes when the smoking cylinder came within point-blank range. The dead shell was thrown back as violently as was its owner, and merely threw a spatter of dangerous fluid at silence in return. She immediately swore and frantically whipped her outer jacket off to throw it away, its thick film incapable of diluting the acidic plasma before it could reach her skin. Let's share the pain, Giza shouted as he downed another vial of the dark liquid hidden in his belt, and more blood coursed through his veins. He ran at the blonde genius, son of a curse, cut himself off as he dove forward, while releasing kunal from the seals on his arms, and buried them in the enemy's chest, one knife in a lung and the other in the heart. Unfortunately, there was no victory to be had as a gusher of blood splashed on his mask and body. Curse! Silence called as she leapt up behind the opponent to redirect the man's attention. Her ploy succeeded, and the bleeding ninja broke his gaze from her rival and swung an arm towards her. She tried to step on the jagged gauntlet and failed, planting her modified sandal on the blood blade instead. For a moment, her intelligent mind was surprised to find the acidic weapon mostly hard. Must be able to solidify it, she thought in an instant. That explains why he won't immediately bleed out from a fatal wound. The next moment, she arsed her left arm around, exotic blade released and aimed at the bloody shinobi's neck. The man ducked, but her actions allowed her ally to escape. As the Uzumaki staggered frantically away, he immediately threw the outer layer of his mask away before the acidic liquid could melt through, silently thankful that he had the foresight to add the extra protection. But his gratitude was short-lived when the thick fluid burned through the rest of his clothing and began searing into his skin. He screamed and shouted against the pain as his hands clawed at the open wounds that would not stop deepening. To further his agony, the fox's chakra kicked in for his patented rapid healing, but didn't keep up with the slowly diluting blood, leaving the boy's flesh searing, healing, and burning all over again in a never-ending cycle. Hinata fired an explosive rod through the man's lungs and moved away, quickly ditching her footwear when she felt the heat of their dissolution touching the bottoms of her feet. She glanced at the enemy and saw him acting to yank the stake out before it exploded. Noting that he cleared it from his chest the moment before it went off in a hail of shrapnel, the Hyuga knew that she had bought some time, however small. She slid next to the writhing blonde, and her medical instincts kicked in. As she began running her hands over the boiling flesh of the boy's body, she resisted the urge to flip his crimson mask up and sneak a peek at his face. Focusing on the task before her, her lavender eyes darted back and forth between her rival and their enemy. Time was running out, and she knew it. The option of hoisting the boy over her shoulder and running entered her mind, but before she could act on it, the blonde genius sat up, flesh still boiling, and healing itself for whatever strange reason. Is it a medical technique, she wondered, or something else? Curse gathered what was left of his willpower and dashed for the source of his slowly subsiding pain. He unsealed his strengthened broadswords and, upon reaching his gleefully awaiting enemy, dug the long curved blades into Giza's upper arms. He then released the now melting weapons and pushed forward, ignoring the acidic blood jabbing into his sides via semi-liquid plasma swords, and jammed his thumbs into the ninja's eyes, while cradling his head tightly in his searing hands. Yes, 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 the madman shouted in ecstasy as the foreign fingers buried themselves in his sockets. A variable explosion of blood erupted from all his wounds and wrapped around his nearby enemy wherever possible, practically burning the boy away. The insane shinobi wondered why his enemy didn't collapse from shock, but the pure pleasure of his pain distracted him from thinking too deeply on it. In truth, Naruto wished he was dead. Almost every surface of his body was smoking and burning away as he was drenched with blood. Thankfully, his mask received a minute amount of the crimson acid, leaving nothing more than a few small holes that wouldn't betray any of his identifiable features. He screamed against the amazing agony as he dipped into the fox's chakra to rapidly heal his constantly reopening wounds. Soon enough, a feeling of numbness covered him as his nerves weren't regenerating swiftly enough to register the scorching heat, and he pressed his deteriorated thumbs further until the crazed opponent went limp with a wide smile. Curse released the man, and both combatants dropped to the ground. The blonde genius willed his arms to pull his body away before his fingers could feel the stone beneath him, and Giza chuckled hard as a trembling hand weakly moved to extract another vial from his belt. The Hyuga stepped in and promptly sliced the deadlier man's moving hand off, and, before her exotic weapon could dissolve, quickly amputated the other limb. Damn, the prone ninja snickered as claws of blood formed in place of his hands, and he continued his blind quest for the life-giving vial. Hinata, with the remnants of her dissolving blade, cut the embroidered belt off and pulled it out of reach. When the enemy reached for it, she tossed it over the side of the bridge and glared daggers at the ninja. She didn't even bother to check up on her ally. No genius, no matter how intelligent or talented, could recover from that amount of acid. She loaded an exploding rod from her cache and aimed for the man's forehead. Looks like Va got me, he said as his smile began to fade with the intense pain. Silence said nothing. Her temper was so far gone that she wondered why she didn't just kill the man. Price paid. Silence, he announced. So you know, I'm just a patrol. I got nothing on Commander Takemi. She could kick my ass any day of the week. Who is your leader? The girl asked apathetically, remembering why she didn't outright execute him. He coughed as control over his blood began to slip. Now that's no fun. He'll be here in a short while. He feebly moved his jagged smoking gauntlets to his neck. You'll know when you see him. With the last of his strength, he slashed so deeply that his head rolled off and joined the belt at the bottom of the long vertical shaft. Silence regarded the warm corpse for a moment before glancing back at Curse. At that moment, she felt intense regret and sadness at never even knowing the fellow genius's name. Sorrow weighed upon her as she slowly strode towards her ally's body. The only person she ever had any true respect for was dead, leaving no hope for her. She felt tears tugging at her pale eyes, but held them back as she approached the prodigy's body and knelt down to lift his crimson mask so she would at least part with the knowledge of his identity. Her fingers cupped the bottom of the mask, and she jolted back in fright when a smoking hand shot over and grasped her own, halting her movement. I'm not dead yet, the blonde genius muttered as he tried to sit up. During Giza's final words, the fox's healing chakra got a handle on the searing blood and neutralized it. All that was left was to heal the remaining horrific wounds. You ain't taken a peek now. Hinata rose to her feet, tears of joy streaming from her eyes, and a smile as wide as her face behind her dull azure mask. You gotta show me that trick, she said apathetically, a feat in and of itself due to the overflow of emotion within her. As by the hands of the fox that made his life miserable. He was more than content to live another day, and happy to have an ally who wouldn't run at the first inkling of fatal danger. Straining his muscles, he pulled himself to his feet and stretched painfully as muscle and flesh reformed over his gruesome burns. Thanks for the backup. Silence. No problem. Her head shot around as her Byakugan detected chakra signatures approaching their position, a lot of them. We gotta get going, she said in a hushed whisper. I think he called for backup before he died. Are you kidding me? The blonde whined as he popped his neck. No. They're coming in from all the upper and lower levels. Well, damn, he exclaimed quietly as he started rushing his movements and preparing to take off. Then I'll catch you later, she nodded. Yeah. Later. With hasty goodbyes exchanged, the geniuses parted for their separate ways to avoid being caught by the small army bearing down on their position. Next day, Naruto stumbled through the streets to his genin squad. He was aggravated by the mundane chores assigned that day but couldn't complain. He was still sore from the previous evening's events. He felt a constant tingling on his skin that felt like a bad sunburn, even though he was technically unharmed by that point. He had also incurred the loss of the seals on his arms due to the mark's ink evaporating upon contact with the acidic blood. Damn it, now I've got to do it all over again. He also noticed a significant change in the Uchiha's attitude. The so-called genius seemed His day took a turn for the odd when he encountered ninjas from the Sand Village. Oh yeah, he remembered, the Chunin exams are up again, aren't they? I wonder if Kakashi thinks we're ready for them. He glanced at his team. Yeah, right. Our teamwork sucks too much. Oh well, not the time to worry about it. Anyway, he wasn't particularly impressed with the fan-wielding girl or the puppet user, but he was surprised to find the third shinobi to be a demon container like himself. He didn't know which beast the boy housed, but the fox's comments echoing throughout his mind the moment he laid eyes on him confirmed another demon's existence. Wow, he sure turned out different. Could I have become like that? As the day went on, it turned out that Team 7 was, in fact, nominated for the promotion tests. Personally, the Uzumaki didn't think any of his squadmates would pass, if not for lack of talent or teamwork, then of the absence of interest. His own focus far more centered upon solving the mystery of unknown enemies lurking beneath Konoha. When the trio was dismissed, he immediately headed home to tattoo on more seals and replace all the weaponry he had lost. Hinata was thoroughly apathetic to her team's wishes to be selected for the Chunin exams, but her shy girl persona would buckle under the boys' demands, so she let it slide. Honestly, she thought it was insanely counterproductive when compared to the hidden threat under the village, but she ultimately decided that she wouldn't be able to sway the situation either way, no matter how much time she spent underground. It was all about identifying and eliminating the person in charge, this Takemi. But then what? She wondered as she strode toward her secret lab. Giza said that Takemi's not the top rung on the ladder, so who's above her? And what did he mean by they'll be here soon enough? Sadly, no amount of deducting could solve her questions with the given information. She would have to dig deeper and, after encountering the blood user, she knew she needed help. She continued her normal evasive pattern until she knew anyone who might be trailing her would have lost her before entering the abandoned warehouse that sat above her prize hidden chamber. Kakashi and his undercover partner Tenzu were keeping a close watch on the Uzumaki boy. The ANBA member suffered the dual tasks of assisting the famous copy ninja while also patrolling Konoha's perimeter during the exams, so his attention was somewhat split, but he could still see where the haddock could not. Anything so far? The one-eyed shinobi inquired without looking up from his adult novel. Nothing dangerous, the masked man replied simply, but Naruto acts as if he were stiff. You noticed it too? He nodded. A few awkward seconds passed and Tenzu felt the need to break the numbing silence. Kakashi, is my presence here really necessary? It doesn't seem that my assistance is, as much as I might agree with you, the copy ninja interrupted, you're here on the Hokage's orders. Besides, if the seal really is weakening, then your skills will definitely be needed. Right. Just keep watching him with me. As the two elite shinobi exchanged idle small talk, Kurenai was conducting her own private investigation. She wasn't surprised that Hinata seemed nervous about entering the Chunin exams, yet succumbed to the boy's wishes, but the girl's reaction seemed off. It was as if something was occupying her mind, and she merely recited words to appease any comment thrown her way. Couple that with her unusual behavior a few days ago, and I've got, well, I don't really know. She tried to tail the shy genin after dismissing the rookie squad, but, strangely, failed the moment she began. I don't think she went home, but where else would she go? And why couldn't I even sense her presence? It's like she disappeared. She leaned back against a wall in the warm late afternoon sun and mulled all the circumstantial evidence over in her head. Is she acting? She wondered, and if she is, why? The Yui continued to ponder the flimsy explanation as she made her way home. It had been a long day, and her head was beginning to ache. Takemi sat on her uncomfortable chair in a lax position as she upturned a bottle of whiskey to her lips. When the last drop of "That's a bad habit," Fumetsu commented blandly, "You could save those bottles for more." "You telling me what to do, freak?" she shot back calmly, while flipping him off. "Don't tell me how to live. What are you here for?" "Giza's body has been recovered. So the blood freak lost, eh?" She couldn't sound less interested. "Oh well, didn't like him anyway. Also, duel requests an audience." No sooner had the Jashin follower's words left his lips than said ninja stormed into the room followed by his silent team commander Takemi. He shouted, "Let me take out those bastards. Let me be the one to kill." She shot a glare so intense that hell froze over momentarily. "Watch your tone, shit face," she said coolly, keeping her normally fiery temper in check so as to not instinctively murder her subordinate. "You'll be put on the case soon enough. Why are we waiting?" He calmed his attitude, but not completely. "If we head out now, we're sure to catch them." Takemi rose from her seat and, in a burst of motion, slammed a steel-plated boot into the dual-colored mask of her underling. The disrespectful ninja flew into the open wooden door and smashed it to splinters. Before he could catch his breath, the female commandant had him by the collar and was breathing down his neck with eyes staring certain death at his hidden face. "Listen, double fucker," she yelled at the top of her lungs, "you might have been hot shit back in that asshole's village, but you're nothing here. That's why all of us are here, to get us out of the way. Do you get me, double fucker?" "Yes, ma'am," he coughed. He didn't have enough air in his lungs to properly voice a thorough apology. The infuriated shinobi released her iron grip, but still glared at him from mere inches away. "You already know the reason why I haven't killed you yet, and it ain't because you're not immortal like this shitter." She pointed to Fumetsu, who didn't appear offended whatsoever. She went back to her hard chair, sat down, and lit a cigarette. After taking a long puff and exhaling a pristine stream of smoke, she said, "Now get the fuck out of here and wait for orders." Duel swiftly and silently obeyed, closely followed by his squad, after they regarded their commander with impassive stares, or the rough equivalent given their varied personalities. When the four were gone, Fumetsu strode toward the exit to join them when he was stopped by his leader. "Fumetsu," she stated as she lit a second cigarette and uncorked another bottle of whiskey, "fix my door." She took a swig of alcohol and glanced numbly at the man. "Please," she added with emphasis, to convey the underlying threat. As the immortal proceeded to retrieve the scattered wooden pieces, Takemi lifted the glass container to her lips for another mouthful when an image of her daughter flashed through her mind. That night, Naruto descended his concealed passage to his hidden chamber as he did most other evenings. After checking all of his extensive security measures to ensure their functioning status, he settled into the corner surrounded by mirrors and began the tedious task of reapplying the storage seals on the back of his arms. He was frustrated that he had to do this a second time, mostly because it was a trying feat to keep the insignificant wounds created by the needle open long enough to properly insert the ink for a working seal. This night in particular, he cursed loudly on more than one occasion when his flesh healed thanks to the fox's chakra and he had to start all over again. But as with everything, time was all he needed and he eventually completed the marks. After that, he stood up and strode over to his weapons lockers and began the arduous motions of replacing the armaments he had lost. It was during this process when he realized something odd about his new seals. He could clearly make out the lines and curves of the marks for the most part, but there were a few gaps where the ink was missing. What the? He mumbled to himself as he activated the seemingly incomplete seals, only to find that they worked just fine. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the ink appeared upon contact with his chakra when he went to activate the seal. I can't believe it, he murmured in mild awe when he came to his conclusion. The ink's invisible in certain places. A wide grin worked onto his facial features. If he could reproduce this anomaly and perfect it, he could cover his entire body with all manners of seals and not have to worry about hiding them. As his mind began to flutter with this new concept, he suddenly remembered that Shia might be willing to talk about her associates. He donned his crimson mask and strode into the cramped prison with confidence. Hey, Shia, he began to yell, but tapered off when he found the young girl to be asleep. He strolled up to the bars and wondered how she could snooze while leaned against the cold iron rods of the holding cell. He waited a few minutes and, deciding that frightening her would be counterproductive, kneeled down and jabbed her lightly in the shoulder. Huh? The young brown-haired girl's eyes opened tiredly as she swiveled her head around to find the person who awoke her. She blinked a few times to clear the sleep from her auburn eyes and yelped in surprise when she saw her captor mere inches away. "See, curse," she cried while instinctively scooting back a few feet. "Morning," he greeted nonchalantly. "I need a few more questions answered." She nodded in understanding, already adopting that guilty look she always seemed to cling onto. "Yesterday I fought some guy named Giza. You know him? Giza?" she repeated as she nodded again. "Why, yes. He was very scary, right? Are there any others like him? Like him?" "No, I don't think so. There's nobody else with B blood like his." "How about any other bloodlines? Any of those bloodlines?" She eyed him quizzically. "What are those?" Curse hung his head and sighed. "Figures," he thought. After another second he lifted his masked face and decided to pursue a new line of questioning. "All right, how about your headquarters? Where did you report back?" She stumbled over her words. "Well, I know where it is, but I don't know the directions." The young ninja exuded nervousness as she tried to defend her position. But if you give me a map or something, C could draw it out for you. You know where it is, but not the directions?" The disguised blonde repeated blandly. "How the hell does that work?" Well, the genius's question flustered her. "I just kind of know where it is." She smiled shyly to drive home her confession. "Fine," he assented after considering her offer for a moment. He stood up and walked out of the makeshift prison, shutting the heavy metal door behind him. Shia waited in the dim light and rocked back and forth nervously, and she wondered what was taking the masked man so long. After a few minutes passed, "Why is he so nice?" she asked herself, staring into space. But he gives me things when I answer his questions. That's part of the ruse." The negative personality shot back. "Once he figures out that you've told him everything you know, he'll kill you for sure. Maybe even worse." "And no." She stuttered inwardly. "Curse isn't like that. He has said that he has a use for me." "Alive, of course he does. It's hard to rape a corpse. They don't fight back." The young disturbed girl began to break into tears at her alter ego's suggestion. Why you say that?" Her mental stuttering began to intensify. "He just wants to get to see Commander Takemi." "Sure he does," the harsh voice replied, "but the second he does, do you think he'll keep you around for something other than being his plaything? You need to trust me more. Have I ever let you down?" "I just shut you up," she defied her second self through a volley of tears. I don't want you around anymore." The dissenting voice said nothing for a moment. "That's too bad, we're one and the same. You think you can deny me and my wisdom for long?" Shia was about to respond to the negative side of her mind when the door opened and her captor emerged with a folded parchment. Without a word, the masked prodigy slid the map through the bars and dropped a pen through after it. The disturbed girl opened the guide and began searching for the point of her capture when the genius's voice interrupted her. "Something wrong?" Naruto slapped himself mentally the moment those words left his mouth. He was curious as to why his prisoner had broken down into tears in such a short period of time without any prompting on his part. "And no," she sniffled, forced a smile, and lied. I just miss my brother." She turned her attention back to the map before her and continued marking it up. She eventually found the points she was searching for and began describing the locations she knew of to her captor. This is the outer perimeter," she said as she ran the pen along an incomplete section of the subterranean maze. "This is where the living quarters are, and this," she tapped the writing utensil on the sturdy paper, "is where the C command center is. I don't know too much about it because I've only been there a few times." So she tapered off, hoping the masked man understood what she meant. Uzumaki nodded and retracted the map and pen before striding towards the door again. This time, however, he merely leaned out of the prison, grabbed something located next to the entrance, and returned. He slid a tray through the slot designated for food and pulled the aluminum foil off to reveal a large meal, a steaming not meal. Shia's Eves instantly lit up in response to the warm food, and she instinctively made way for it. Without thinking, she dug into the cuts of beef without a word of thanks, and suddenly remembered how rude it was. I'm sorry, she cried, almost dropping the meat to the floor in her panic. Thank you so much. She bowed her head as deeply as she could without splitting her skull against the rocky floor, and clasped her loosely chained hands together above her head. Naruto merely nodded and replied, no worries. Enjoy. He strode to the exit and shut the secure door behind him as the young girl dug in heartily. She couldn't help but revel in her minor victory against her alternative self. See? She flaunted inwardly, he's not cruel at all. Her alter ego made no effort to respond, but she could feel the ensuing silence acknowledging defeat for now. Hinata on for the umpteenth time that night. She and her assembled subordinates had spent the entire evening reconstructing all the battle equipment she had lost in the battle with Giza. The Hyuga never realized how much work went into her various little gadgets and machines until she had to rebuild all of them from scratch at the same time. As Shiori and Ichiro welded the armor plating on the last of her weapons, the budding genius crashed on her couch and shut her weary eyes. What a day, she whined mentally as she ran through everything in her head. Why did the Chunin exams have to come along now? The timing couldn't be worse. Her lavender eyes blinked, and she sat up in revelation. Wait a second. Giza said the top leader would be here soon enough. Could he have meant the exams? She stayed silent and glared at the floor blankly as she thought. A lot of powerful and influential people come into the villages wherever the exams are held, even the leaders of the participants' villages. What if this leader guy is targeting the feudal? Kakashi sighed as he read his adult novel. I kinda wish I could keep an eye on Naruto, but I'm sure he'll be fine. He became aware of a familiar presence and glanced to the side to find his assigned partner. Yo, Tenzu, off duty for the moment, the Anu member replied. I came to affirm our next course of action regarding Naruto. Well, nothing much we can do about it right now, the copycat ninja responded. We'll just keep an eye on him after the exams are finished. Who knows, maybe you'll do something out of the ordinary and attract some attention. That's what I'm worried about. What if the seal holding the fox, it won't break, the haddock interrupted. The fourth was a master of seals, this one will hold. He lowered his book as he explored that frightening possibility. Even if it does eventually fail, it won't be for a while. We've got plenty of time to worry about it later. I see. The masked man said nothing but his tone betrayed his unease. How are your rounds these days? The one-eyed man inquired, eager to change the subject. They're tolerable. Nothing out of the ordinary as far as the foreign shinobi are concerned. Coming and going as usual. Tenzu nodded. Yes, all those expelled have already vacated the village. How about the nobles? Kakashi carried the casual conversation. They still sending their servants and bodyguards in advance to prepare for their arrivals. Yes, the Anbu ninja recalled how the rich aristocrats made damn sure their life of luxury was assured by the time they actually arrived a month later. Although there are quite a few civilians this time around, servants and personal guards, I wonder why they believe their own security measures are necessary in a shinobi village. Nobles are nobles, the infamous specialist spoke his simple words of wisdom. They think the world revolves around them. True. Well, I have to get going now. All right, he buried his nose in his erotic novel again. See you around. With goodbyes voiced, Tenzu shimmered away to resume his exhaustive security rounds. Commander Takemi, Fumetsu addressed his superior as he entered her chamber. Our forces have successfully replaced all the noble servants and infiltrated Konoha. Also, Sonnen and his squad have successfully infiltrated Practice Arena 44, that forest of death place, the foul-mouthed woman clarified between swigs of liquor. If she hadn't been in a perpetually bad mood, she would have laughed at such a ridiculous name. Yes, the Jashin follower continued unabated, and their secure communication line has been set up. Yay, she cheered without a shred of enthusiasm. Now the party begins. Pardon? The immortal didn't really care, but he knew Takemi would never make such an offhanded comment without reason. Did you know Sonnen? I did not. He himself was rather neutral towards the top commander. Well, I found his ass out without him or his shithead buddies noticing, so she drank a mouthful of whiskey, then spun the bottle in her hand. Let's just say he won't be so loyal when his squad mates are done with him. You ordered his execution? Not quite, she replied as she capped the alcohol and pulled an unfiltered cigarette from her half-empty pack. They don't know it yet, but they're smart. They'll figure it out. What about other loyalists? The undying man questioned. Sonnen is surely not the only one. True, but the asshole's alone on his squad. No one'll be the wiser when he's nailed to the wall. Are you concerned about the other loyalists reporting you? Our leader is holding your daughter hostage in case you betray him. Takemi's mildly pleasant demeanor instantly darkened at the mention of her child. It's not unusual for our squads to turn on each other in extreme situations. Sonnen's teammates are known for their hatred of our shitty superior. The other fuckhead loyalists won't be able to trace anything back to me. What about now? They could be listening. Why do you think everyone's out on assignment all the time? Besides, she pulled her instrument of battle to her lap and strummed a few chords. This remained bugged at all. After a moment of silence, Fumetsu asked, "What about me? How can you be sure I won't turn you in?" It was a hypothetical question. He was honestly in this for the slaughtering, but he was curious nonetheless. You know what's happened? She took a deep breath and polished off her cigarette. "I'd tear you limb from limb and burn the leftovers. Even that shit'll kill you zombie bastards." Days passed, and the survival examination in the Forest of Death continued in all its brutal glory. The dawning hours of the test proved to be the most intense, with the arrival of the ninja in charge of the experienced grass trio, single-handedly crippling Team 7. Naruto wasn't thrilled about the fight to begin with. He wanted to battle all three, and was sorely let down when the other two promptly disappeared upon arrival. The blonde decided that the fox's chakra was worthy enough to unleash against the lone opponent, and he was right until the enemy slipped up in his control and exuded an immense amount of power. The moment the Uzumaki felt this, he knew something was wrong. Novice ninjas did not have this kind of power, much less the ability to conceal it so well. So the young genius sat on his hands in recovery. While he slept off the effects of the battle, his senses were wide awake, feeding information to his semi-conscious mind in case anything his teammates or allies couldn't handle came along. Thankfully, no formidable opponents showed, and he was able to enjoy his lengthy slumber. But after he woke up, he was anxious for anything to happen. He was bored out of his skull and had a hankering for some action. Deciding to take a risk, he waited until his teammates weren't paying attention to him and tapped his foot against the ground, creating a dozen earth clones in the nearby forest. The copies instantly changed their appearance to that of his alter ego and moved off as one in search of hostile targets. Meanwhile, Hinata was going through similar withdrawals. Teammate may as well have been seeded into the final tournament. They recovered their second scroll from a hapless squad that was stupid enough to run into a horde of leeches. Leeches, for God's sake. Freakin' bugs. Needless to say, she waited patiently for Kiba and Shino to nod off before she could make her move. During her wait, she either slept or pondered over what she saw in the forest with the applicant named Gara. Her musings never lasted long due to the lack of information on the murderous youth and her own boredom. She needed something to keep her mind occupied, and there simply wasn't anything in the tower to satisfy her needs. The moment of truth for her solitary excursion finally came when both her teammates dozed off simultaneously in a room isolated from the others. She administered her sleep rug to the two, keeping close tabs on the complicated mixture so the Abiram's insects would also succumb to its influence, and applied her simple hypnotism techniques on the two. If everything fared well, and she had no reason to doubt herself since her methods worked flawlessly on her younger sibling, the boys would wake up at least a day later and be none the wiser to the missing time. She silently exited the compound, unsealed her newly reconstructed battle gear from a scroll she kept in her pouch, and sailed off into the dark forest to silence. As the sun rose in the noon sky, the numerous curse clones leapt from tree to tree in search of the grass trio. The copies' minds were occupied with the final thoughts of the original. Confront the ninja that gave him problems earlier as well as his or her team. The masked Earth clones had no need to dispatch the handful of opposing squads they passed by. They simply weren't worth the effort. Another few minutes went by, and one of the curses halted. The others noticed, and the web of geniuses closed in on the observant copy. Their many mirrored eyes scanned the thick foliage and rested on a slightly less cluttered patch of ground atop an elevated mound that was almost completely concealed by the towering trees. One of the clones began to glance around the perimeter and found an unexpected azure mask staring back from across the clearing. Likewise, Silence was also surprised to find Curse in the Forest of Death, or at least his clones. No matter, she shrugged the coincidence off for the moment, seeing that there were bigger problems brewing within the Ankleset hilltop. Three men stood between the monstrous trees, one of them holding an angular iron spike that pierced a fresh corpse's throat. The man with the outstretched arm wore a huge deep green cloak loosely tied together by a pale emerald sash. His blue spiky hair stuck straight back against his head like bent needles, held in place by another light jade-colored piece of cloth on another, wore close-cropped clothes dyed a dull blue, and embroidered with fantastic golden threads that were intricately woven together to form multiple dragons. His blonde hair emerged into a crew cut from the blue embroidered fabric tied around his eyes. The third man was in stark contrast to the other two's mostly upbeat color scheme. He was of short stature and dressed like a ninja of old, ebony robes that concealed all but his eyes and hands. His forehead was protected by a shaft of smooth metal painted black that angled back against his head, and his simple belt held two dark and short blades. He came straight out of a textbook of ancient shinobi history. As the prodigies noted the stranger's surroundings, they noticed two other corpses nailed to the winding limbs of the ancient trees. It's those other two grass ninjas. Hinata recognized the familiar dead men and wondered why the newest victim had been attacked. Judging by his appearance, she noted, it looks like he's with those other three. He's dressed strangely, and he doesn't have a village headband. The man in the green garb retracted his foot-long iron nail, and the rusty weapon receded into his loose sleeve. Can't believe this bastard was a loyalist. What a known good thing we found him out, the blindfolded figure stated with a subdued smirk. Sonnen and his friends all deserve to die. We are being watched, the stocky traditional ninja stated. You think I didn't notice? The sage-colored spike user berated his comrade as he glanced in the direction of the curse clones. You must be this curse quite right. The copies said nothing in the vain hope that maybe, just maybe, their presences were concealed, and the hostile man was merely bluffing. The other presence must be silence, the diminutive shinobi said, as his eyes glanced in the girl's direction. No shit, the brightly colored blonde enemy said with a friendly smile. Let's do this thing. He raised his open palms to his face and touched the tips of his fingers together. Honor you, you're up. The dark ninja nodded and shimmered from view. You know, the green-clad enemy ejected his lengthy nail from his loose cloak and held it out in a challenging manner against Naruto's clones. I hope you guys made your peace, cause you're all gonna die today. Gosenkugi, stay on task, the traditional shinobi's voice spoke to the nail wielder from nowhere. You guys have all the fun before me, the colorful man whined as he clasped his hands together and began to fade from view. I'm Genshin. Nice to meet you. The Uzumaki's earth clones suddenly felt one of their numbers slosh into mud. They all turned to the rear to find an embroidered palm protruding from the mound of wet dirt, before fading away. Again Hinata activated her Byakugan to find Genshin behind her temporary ally, when her superior vision suddenly brought Honoryu into view right behind her. She ducked in time for the traditional ninja's short painted blade to cleanly slice off the bottom of the beige shroud that concealed her blue hair. Mon! Gosenkugi yelled as the multiple prodigies were forced towards him by his teammates. He flung his arms out in both directions, and his deep green cloak fluttered in the breeze, letting loose a salvo of large rusty arm-length square nails. Hinata pushed off a branch with her left foot and spun gracefully in the air between the airborne spikes, twirling her gauntlet blade to counteract the dark-clad ninja following suit. Her Byakugan had been inactive when the traditional shinobi initially melted from view, but her now activated bloodline could clearly make out the shorter man, as he also spun around the projectiles with his own harsh, grace. The curse earth clones were not as fortunate. 4 of the 11 copies were struck by the elongated nails, while distracted in their search for the elaborately decorated man hidden from their sight. The 2 clones in front of the remaining 7 redirected their attention to the emerald-clad enemy and unsheathed a pair of metal spears in preparation for an attack. When they came within striking distance, they lunged forward and connected the bladed staffs against metal. As Gosenkugi twisted his body, his thick clothing tore with the momentum, revealing a quartet of nails loosely strapped to the inside of the cloak, interlocking around the spear's blades. Silence descended on the nail user after successfully fending off her semi-visible assailant. As Honoryu dodged behind trees to avoid the multiple exploding stakes fired from the Hyuga's launchers, the blue-haired girl swung her bladed gauntlet down upon the sage-clad man, aiming for his head. With a mad grin, the enemy shot his right arm back to intercept the female genius, while thrusting his opposing limb against Naruto's dual clones. 2 of the rusted angular spikes ripped through his cloak and, somehow forming an air-filled wedge as they traveled side by side, caught her extended blade. Hinata swore under her breath and kicked her legs out at his back on impulse, hoping to connect her chakra-charged feet with the stationary opponent. Sure enough, her electrified sandals landed on something, but it was not flesh. The surface pushed back and she abandoned the attack when she realized it was more elongated nails. Damn it, she thought as she leapt away into the waiting arms of the ebony clan ninja. I can't see through that damn cloak. Must be lined with seals designed specifically to hinder the Byakugan. She swung around and countered Honoryu's drawn blade with her own. If that's true, then these guys have gathered a ton of intel on the village, and its weakness is the Uzumaki copies confronting Gosenkugi drop their spears when the enemy, unconcerned by the rival Prodigies' attack, thrust an arm out, throwing another salvo of angular spikes at them. The moment they stepped back they prepared for a counterattack, only to have the farthest one return to mud, as the invisible Gentian thrust an arm through it. The invisible enemy had made short work of almost all the clones during the confrontation, reducing their numbers to a mere 2.th Earth copy that had not yet engaged the spiked Osing Shinobi, pressed his back against the one that had, determined to ward off the hidden ninja, while his double watched his back. It glanced at the ground and saw a few leaves flatten as if being stepped upon, and launched a salvo of ninja stars at the location. But it was all in vain when the now familiar knife hand strike came in from the side and plunged itself into the clone's neck, dispersing it into a pile of wet dirt. Swearing like a sailor, the final clone launched a handful of lethal yo-yos around the branches above and retracted the wires in a heartbeat, pulling himself into the temporary safety of the dark canopy. "Can't fight like this," the copy mumbled as it watched its temporary ally divide our attention between Gosenkugi and Honoryu. "They're forcing us into a two-front battle and their teamwork's really good. They make up for the other's shortcomings, yo," a voice said from behind the copy, before its owner buried his fist into the copy's skull. "One left to go," he murmured, peering at the surrounded genius girl despite his blindfolded state. The young prodigy already had her hands full with his teammates, so his assistants would dispatch her easily. Maintaining his technique, he leapt from the oversized branch for another attached to a monstrous tree lower down. And whipped around when he heard several thunks followed by the sound of his previous position being engulfed in a burst of flames. There are more of them. Naruto, upon receiving the memories of his deceased clones, had managed to fool his own squad by replacing himself with a clone so he could personally fight the mysterious trio alongside his temporary ally. The final experience to enter his mind revealed the blindfolded man's location, so he unsealed several oversized shuriken covered in explosive tags and lobbed them in the man's last known general direction. He didn't see body parts flying though, so he figured he was 2 seconds too late. As the blonde lunged forward past the smoking tree, he felt something press against his mind as well as his chest. Suddenly, a sharp pain emanated from beneath his sternum, and his hands instinctively shot around the developing wound, only to stop as if wrapping around an imaginary limb. The boy grit his teeth and, on a hunch, curled his ringed fingers around the unseen appendage and swung himself and whatever he clung to haphazardly to the forest floor. He crashed against the hard dirt and felt massive bruising developing along his side, but he also heard a grunt of pain alongside his own. He held on to his invisible assailant. Silence. He called to his not-so-distant ally, "How you doing? Not good?" She shouted back as her head fell between her knees in an effort to duck under something the boy couldn't see. "I need some help here, right? But first, can you see this guy?" He guessed where Gentian's neck should. "He's using Jinjutsu." "What? Seriously?" He muttered to himself as he halted his chakra flow, and the colorful man's outline began to shimmer into view. "Oh, hey. You're right. Damn it," the restrained man swore. "Goes. Honor you." He addressed his comrades in a rising panic. Help Hinata, having driven her fight with the traditional ninja into the tree's cover to avoid the nail user's attacks, had finally managed to block the short man's route, with a web of wires stretching between her new explosive needles. If her opponent put any pressure on a single line, he would be caught in a conflagration filled with high-velocity steel slivers. The girl unleashed her rebuilt yin and yang against the trapped man, and prepared her right arm's dual-stake launchers to fire explosive bolts in whichever direction the enemy planned to dodge. The deadly top bore down on the ebony-clad shinobi, and he moved to the right, so she aimed her arm in the same direction. Her fingers twitched, pulling down on the tiny wires that acted as triggers, and the pre-fractured rods were let loose with a burst of hot steam. They flew at the man as he drew his second short blade, and their fuses dwindled to nothing. The female prodigy smirked. She had this 1.0, so she thought. In a flash, the traditional ninja jabbed his short shorts out straight in front of him in perfect alignment with the airborne rods, then thrust his arms akimbo, knocking the stakes into the figurative minefield of wires and needles to his sides. He was easily clear from the ensuing explosion as he sheathed his short ninja blades, drew a pair of shuriken from where his jacket met his pants, and then flung the projectiles at the genius girl with amazing ferocity. The Hyuga easily batted them to the side with her bladed gauntlet as she remotely controlled her deadly top to turn into the enemy, but the minor distraction of the ninja stars did its job. Yin and Yang spun like mad, its curved blades blurred around the rim, into the enemy's position, missing by a hair as Honoryu made a hastier retreat through the now cleared needle minefield. Damn it. She twisted in place, loading another pair of explosive bolts and firing wildly at the Ebony Clan ninja, failing to hit him by an embarrassingly wide margin. She dashed after him but soon encountered a half-completed ring of arm-sized rusted nails floating in midair and pointing towards her. The small metal pikes flew forward, and Hinata was forced into an elaborate dance to avoid them all, as they stuck into the ground upon which she stood. Naruto, having drawn a kunai from one of the smaller seals on his arm, was preparing to run its sharp metal edge across his restrained target, when the shorter ninja appeared directly in front of him, snatched the knife from his struggling hand, and stabbed said hand with his own weapon. The Uzumaki, realizing his predicament, released his quarry and leapt back into the trees behind him. He yanked the knife from his hand, and the deep wound immediately began to smoke shut, thanks to the accursed fox. He unsealed his favored ninjato and was hit with a sudden realization. Silence. He shouted, "Push forward now." He stuck his sword into the ground, and its glyphs glowed brilliantly as it cinched with the earth below. He pulled it free and an attached whip of stone followed. Right. The girl fell back, understanding the tactical advantage the intelligent duo now had. Before, the two had been forced to fight on dual fronts, but now the hostile trio was located between them, trapped in the same disadvantage. She recalled Yin and Yang, sent a surge of electrical energy through it, and then lobbed it at Gosenkugi. The spinning blades crackled as the top of death spun wildly towards the nail-wielder's head. Ninja cracked an amused smile, and pulled his heavy cloak off, throwing it to the ground with a significant clunk of metal on metal. He began to move his arms like a boisterous soothsayer, and the elongated rusted spikes in his discarded clothing moved out of their holsters and began to rotate around his body in a rough spherical shape, slowly building up speed in preparation for clashing with Silence's deadly disc. The Hyuga frowned behind her blue smooth mask as her Byakugan finally got a good look at the man. She could faintly make out chakra strings connecting the freestanding weapons to his fingers. The lines couldn't be more than a few molecules in diameter, but they were definitely there, revealed by the amplified glow of chakra in the girl's bloodline eyes. "I get it," she mused, as her superior vision noted that every nail was rising into the air with the string's support, including the ones behind her. "Curse," she called to her temporary ally as the crimson-masked genius struggled to fight off the Genjutsu user, as well as the traditional ninja. "This nail guy is a puppeteer?" He shot back as he hacked a log to pieces, convinced that Gentian was merely projecting a piece of wood before his mirrored eyes. He instantly broke off from the skirmish, brushed by Honoryu and receiving a minor gash as payment, and approached Gosenkugi with his modified sword drawn. "Lem handle him." "I know how puppeteers work." The genius girl nodded, and, using Yin and Yang to distract the spike-wielding ninja, dashed by Naruto in the opposite direction. Her intelligent rival was obviously having trouble with the illusions cast by the blindfolded shinobi, and, combined with the close-quarters combat provided by the Ebony Clan ninja, was losing to the combination. "Looks like that Genjutsu guy is extending his techniques to this Honoryu as well," she analyzed, blinking hard as the colorful blind man shimmered from her excellent vision. "Strong stuff too. My Byakugan's losing him from time to time. Must be directly applying chakra to my senses." She bound a coil of wires around the lethal disc and lobbed the weapon in the midst of the scattering duo. Utilizing its remote control, the closet genius commanded the circular device to spin chaotically in random patterns around her enemies, enclosing them in an electrified kill zone. They didn't look too. The Uzumaki smirked as he glanced back at his temporary partner's setup before resetting his gaze against the puppeteer. He sealed his blade into one of the large marks on his back and, in the return motion, unsealed a total of 8 kunai from the smaller tattoos on his arms and charged them with enough chakra to burn through anything. The moment he was ready, the snake-like line of arm-length square nails shifted towards him and whipped forward. An eternity of minutes passed as the two geniuses fought with their backs to the other. Whenever Silence encountered a technique beyond her specialties, she called upon Curse, and he stepped in while she ensured safety for his blind spots. Likewise, if the trio of enemies switched tactics and Naruto got into trouble as a result, Hinata backed him up as he watched her back. Slowly yet surely, the prodigies were inherently learning to work around the other's weaknesses to form a perfect team. The sun began to noticeably dip into the afternoon sky, and the battleground was littered with scorch marks, destroyed and ignored weaponry, and small smoking craters. The ancient trees bore new marks of intense conflict, and the once grassy clearing around the mostly stationary puppeteer had been ground into burned dirt and mud. All parties involved displayed signs of weariness. Just because they possessed large stores of chakra did not mean they couldn't tire out with such a high number of hostile antics. Had enough vet? Gosenkugi asked with a grin, chest rising and falling as he panted. The nails still revolved around him in midair, but he was using fewer and fewer of the rusted skewers as time went on. Not quite, the blonde answered. He brought his ninjato to bear and aimed it at the man. Who do you guys work for? The spike user cocked a curious eyebrow at the masked duo and glanced at his equally puzzled teammates before looking back. You don't know? I thought you captured Shia. She doesn't know, he promptly returned. And Giza died before he could tell us. There's that she again, the Hyuga wondered as she threw a hidden look of skepticism towards the boy to her left. I'm making him spill everything about her when we're done here. Gentian chuckled. You know, he raised his open palms in a friendly gesture. Does it really matter if you know who we work for? I mean, you can be on our side at this point. Not anymore. Silence decided to add her 2 cents. Giza mentioned that everyone in the advance recon is a criminal from your village and hates its leader. Why is that? The answer is simple, Honor, you replied in his deep, formal voice. All of us have a grudge of some sort against our leader. My clan predates the creation of ninjutsu and jinjutsu, so every ninja produced by my family specializes in close quarters combat, yet he still has the power to hold my clan hostage. If we do not supply him with shinobi, he will eradicate my entire family. My village got razed to the ground when I was a kid. The jinjutsu user spoke up. Turned out the guys that did it were under his supervision, so I joined up for revenge. I laid railroad track with my old man, Gosenkugi explained as one of his massive nails spun lazily next to his head. Before my folks got killed in the last Great War, so my 3 little sisters and I were orphans for a while. We joined the village for the promise of bread, water, and shelter. Course, you can have all that in a prison. The rotating nail halted at the implication. We don't want your help, the blindfolded illusionist spat, and we don't want your sympathy. This is our revenge, not yours. I won't be happy unless I help mount that bastard's head on a pike. Sounds familiar, Naruto mused with a certain Uchiha in mind. If they're as single-minded as Sasuke, then there's no helping them. He tapped his female ally on the shoulder. They're gone, he said with humility. We can't help them if they don't want to. Yeah, she nodded, accepting what had to be done. She loaded the final 2 explosive rods into the stake launchers on her right arm as she thumbed the remote for yin and yang. The intelligent duo burst forward for the enemies, and she whispered into his ear before parting, go for the jinjutsu guy. I'll back you up when the time comes. The blonde didn't know what she meant exactly, but he trusted her judgment. She was better at debunking the art of illusions anyway. Wait a sec, an observation struck him. There are no eye holes in her mask, and she really knows how to dispel jinjutsu without too much effort. Isn't there a bloodline that does that? His mind instantly dropped the train of thought as Gentian shimmered from view, and he went into a defensive stance, batting away the rusty nails encircling him, and keeping his azure eyes open for the invisible. The blue-haired girl kept her Byakugan focused on the illusionist, Honor You, and the puppeteer's airborne weapons. She had to time things just right in order to eliminate one source of their woes. She swung her left arm, the attached gauntlet's blade, clashing with the traditional ninja's dark short swords, with glints of sparks announcing the metal's contact. She purposely caught an upturned root with her heel and fell backwards, narrowly avoiding having her head removed, as the short shinobi swung one of his blades. Kicking back with both legs, her left foot knocked the short sword out of the man's extended arm, before her right appendage's momentum swung her body back into the upright position. In the same motion, she aimed her stake launchers at the opponent and fired one of the final 2 rods into the chose quarters specialist's shoulder. The projectile wasn't stopped by bone, so instead it passed through and exploded against a tree a ways back. The intended effect, however, was delivered as Honor You clutched his wound and put distance between them. Hinata's superior vision saw her systematically fighting off the barrage of angular spikes and a path, however small, open between the nails. She burst forward when she saw her chance. Naruto was having a rough time dealing with the constant distraction of the rusty armaments, coupled with the impending threat of an invisible assassin. Any small opening between the nails could allow a deep blow hidden from his eyes to pass through, and taking the time to secure the temporary pathways took away from his concentration and allowed several massive spikes to bury themselves into his flesh. He couldn't afford to spend time or effort in removing the usty things either, because doing so would only break his concentration even more, thus allowing more nails to surpass his defense. Another small break in the line opened up, and the Uzumaki only glanced at it once before averting his gaze elsewhere. Suddenly, the sixth sense in the back of his skull felt another presence nearby, and his head shot around to find the air next to him vibrating so lightly that a mere glance would easily miss it. He moved to swing his blade at Gentian, but he knew his body was turned too far in the other direction to make it in time. He began to consider dipping into the fox's chakra when a flash of blue bumped into him. In that moment, the blonde's senses slowed everything down, and he saw the world crawl by. His azure eyes noted another nail thrusting forward as Silence, who was now at his back, grasped the shimmering air with both hands and moved the Genjutsu user directly in front of the advancing spike. His slowed vision clearly saw the blood burst from the enemy's chest as the weapon thoroughly pierced the man's heart. The crimson liquid shone brilliantly in the afternoon sun, and the sharpness of the rusted spike's edge appeared as an infinite canyon of reddened iron. As the fraction of a second passed, the speed of reality caught up, and the boy was surprised to find his ally embracing him tightly enough to somewhat constrict his breathing. Shit. Gosenkugi swore due to the friendly fire. His reaction time had been reduced during the course of the battle, so the heightened possibility of him accidentally killing a comrade with a close attack had become so high it came true. He clenched his hands into fists and pulled his arms back, chakra wires translating the motion into another attack. Every nail encircling the enemy shooting inwards with fantastic speed. In the span of a heartbeat, Hinata pulled Naruto to the ground, creating as little surface area as their combined bodies could manage. The moment they hit the dirt, Yin and Yang's internal generators spun like mad. As the nails neared, the electrical field of the circular device activated and the rusted metal weapons were violently thrown away in the synchronized magnetic wave. Shit. The puppeteer threw a fit as his mind raced. His concentration had fallen to his pent-up frustration. He reformed several energy strings, scooped up some nearby angular spikes, and tossed them at the duo. The genius girl had the advantage at this point. She unattached the deadly top and tossed it at the oncoming weapons, activating the magnetic field when it was clear of her and curse. Once again, Gosenkugi's attack was nullified by a wave of opposing magnetism. The blonde broke off from his temporary ally and confronted the wounded Honoryu, capitalizing on the opponent's wounded shoulder. The boy summoned a few earth clones and, after surrounding the increasingly desperate ninja, unceremoniously inflicted several wounds on the traditional shinobi. Consciousness fading from blood loss, the close-quarters combat specialist felt it. "That's it, goddammit," the nail user shouted in anger as his second teammate went down. He shot his arms out away from his body and exerted the last of his chakra into his final technique. Yin and Yang spun into him with crackling blades, but he winced and took the intense pain like a man, bending over slightly so the circular weapon would be too entangled with his body to be extracted. His eyes darted back and forth, noting that the geniuses were both closing in on him simultaneously. When their distance became satisfactory, he grasped all the chakra strings, and every nail scattered across the battlefield shot up and formed a loose, rotating dome around the standing combatants. "See you in hell," he screamed against the pain, and pulled his arms in as he fell to a knee. The spikes filling the air ceased their rotation and shot inward, sharp end first. It was a mutual suicide technique. Naruto and Hinata instantly realized what was happening, but they were far too close to Gosenkugi to escape. The Hyuga swallowed hard as her swift mind struggled to come up with a solution quickly enough to work. Yin and Yang's too far away to reach in time, she analyzed. "Looks like I'll have to use gentle fist techniques." She began to fall into position when she was suddenly embraced around the abdomen. Glancing back in surprise, she found Curse holding her tightly with his back to the incoming elongated nails. "Hang on," he shouted as he dipped into the fox's chakra and applied it to his body. With a great amount of effort, he pushed back with his legs and, along with his ally, flew backwards against the rusty barrage. He winced as a handful of the large nails grazed and stuck into his back, but he emerged with no more than 3 still painfully attached to him. As the duo cleared the hailstorm of metal, they witnessed the angular spikes impale Gosenkugi at every angle. He had been the center of the technique, and, therefore, the recipient of the full brunt of the suicide move. The nails penetrated him at every possible configuration, and there was no evidence that there was even a bot. "Are you okay?" Silence asked as she moved around to Curse's back and examined his wounds. "Well, no vitals are hit," she diagnosed, But you got some serious wounds here, what are you doing what? He inquired as he reached back to pull the 3 spikes from his flesh. Each one hurt like hell, and he winced with every motion. With the final weapon removed, he sat on the ground, panting hard. His masked head swiveled around when he felt a pleasant tingling on his back. What are you doing healing the worst injuries? Hinata responded as her medical techniques worked their magic on the most horrific of the wounds. After several minutes, her impromptu patient was stable and she sat a few feet away from him, totally exhausted. She chuckled, "Thanks a bunch for saving my ass. Thanks for saving mine," he replied with a smile, as his minor wounds began healing with the aid of the 9-tailed demon's chakra. He glanced at the statue of rusted metal and was struck with a horrid realization. His head shot back and forth in search for his target without success. With apprehension lining his voice, he asked, "Where's honor?" You said. Traditional ninja stumbled away from the battlefield while clutching his wounds closely in an attempt to stem the bleeding. Thankfully, it was working, and he also seemed to have evaded the genius couple. "I'm going home," he thought as pleasant memories of his ancient clan flooded his mind. "They won't miss me here." He passed the corpse of the loyalist, Sonnen, and considered what his fate would have been if he had not been forced to serve his tyrant of a ruler. His musings didn't last long. Before he even realized what was going on, a giant snake erupted from the forest behind him and swallowed him whole. Normally, he would have cut his way out despite his wounds, but the oversized beast was a powerful summon. It disappeared into its own dimension, sealing the doomed fate of the ebony-clad shinobi. A certain Sannin hiding in the skin of an amorphous grass ninja oversaw the unorthodox execution with a sickly grin. He gazed at his dead subordinates, also concealed by the other grass ninja's flesh nailed to the massive tree. "That's what you get for killing my servants," he muttered before exiting the scene. The survival portion of the Chunin exams came to an end with too many contestants passing. Elite squads of Jounin prowl practice Arena 44 in search of the test's dropouts, if any were left to be found. Squad 21 was one such team on this search. The day had been unbelievably slow, since almost all participants had already been accounted for, dead or alive. However, standard procedure dictated that the training area be searched over with a fine-tooth and comb a second time, should not every genin be located on the first pass. This happened every single time, and even then there were almost always rookie shinobi totally missing, vanished into the darkness of the deadly forest. Haru, a distant relative to Inoichi Yamanaka, searched alongside his comrades as they passed effortlessly beneath the ancient tree's canopy for bodies. He was the black sheep of the family, preferring to keep his distance from family affairs and instead be more involved with his duties as a jounin. He stifled a yawn as he leapt off another branch. He was bored out of his mind. "We're not gonna find anything anyway," he whined internally. "I mean, there's only a few genin, not whoa." His train of thought ended instantly when he spotted a scorched section of earth inhabited by a lone individual. He signaled his team and they halted, peering at the scene. The strange man was in a straitjacket and walked as if inflicted with cerebral palsy. His unruly mane of hair looked like someone had dumped buckets of paint with every color of the spectrum on his head and forgot to wash. He staggered in place around a man-sized column of rusted metal, and there was a trail of blood running off the battlefield into the cover of the forest's thick foliage. "What's his affiliation?" one of Haru's comrades whispered. "I don't see a village headband. Let me figure it out," the estranged Yamanaka said as he balanced his body against the tree, in preparation for his family's patented mind-body switch. Content that his body wouldn't fall to certain death when unattended, he performed the technique, and his mind transferred into the distant stranger. Upon entry, Haru wondered why it was so simple to enter the unusual man's mind. There was always a minute amount of resistance due to the invading personality, shoving the original to the side. "All right, let's access his memories," he thought to himself as he delved into the odd man's mind to find almost no substance. There were no old memories, or at least none from before a certain point. He accessed the oldest thought he could find in the stranger.